They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from family. But no one ever warns you what it feels like when your own child looks at you like a liability on a balance sheet. I was sitting at the head of the conference table I had personally selected 12 years earlier, Italian walnut custom finish, when my son calmly informed me that I was no longer necessary. The air conditioning hummed above us. Papers were stacked neatly in front of everyone except me. That should have been my first clue. My name is Eleanor Hart. I am 62 years old, a grandmother of 3, a widow, and the founder of Hartwell Interiors. Or at least I was until that morning. Mom, Daniel said, folding his hands like a man twice his age, "The board agrees it's time for you to step back." The board? I almost laughed. The board was a convenient word for something much simpler. My son had decided he was done waiting for me to age gracefully out of his way. I scanned the room. Laura, my CFO, avoided my eyes. Mark, the company lawyer, pretended to review notes he already knew by heart. Daniel met my gaze without flinching. "And what exactly does stepping back look like?" I asked. He inhaled, slowly rehearsed. "You'll retain your shares. Of course, your legacy is important, but operational control, final authority, contract approvals, all of that will transition to me immediately." Immediately. There it was. I thought of the nights I slept on my office couch while Daniel was in middle school waiting for overseas suppliers to confirm shipments. I thought of the vacations I canceled, the relationships I never pursued after my husband died, because I believed stability mattered more than companionship. "Was this discussed with me beforehand?" I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We didn't want to stress you. Stress me. I built this company while raising a child alone and burying a husband. Stress had never scared me." "What about the transfers from our reserve accounts?" I asked quietly. "Or the consulting contracts approved without my signature?" The temperature in the room shifted. Laura's pen froze midair. "That's not relevant," Daniel said quickly. It was very relevant. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply adjusted my jacket and picked up my purse. "If this is what you believe is best for the company," I said evenly, "I won't stand in the way." Relief rippled through the room. Daniel exhaled. He thought he had won. He didn't notice that I never said I agreed. That evening I sat alone in the dining room of the house my husband and I had bought decades earlier. The table was set for 6, though I was the only one there. Old habits die hard. An invitation lay unopened beside my wine glass. Daniel's second wedding, destination resort, company-sponsored, of course. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. Silver hair, fine lines, but my eyes were still sharp. People assume women my age fade quietly, that we confuse patience with weakness. They forget that patience is learned often through survival. I opened the old safe in my study. Inside were documents no one else had ever seen. Original contracts, amendment drafts, and a will that had never been revised. I closed the door softly, let Daniel believe I had stepped aside. The game had only just begun. 3 weeks after my so-called retirement, Hartwell Interiors hosted its annual Christmas gala without me. I found out the same way everyone else did, through a photograph online. Daniel stood beneath the showroom light's champagne glass, raised his new wife at his side. The caption read, "A new era begins." I read it twice, then I closed the app. I felt no anger, just clarity. That morning I met with Margaret Klein, my attorney of 20 years. She was 64, sharp-tongued, twice divorced, and allergic to sentimental excuses. "Eleanor," she said after reviewing the documents, I slid across her desk. "Your son isn't just pushing you out. He's positioning you as a legal shield." I nodded. I suspected as much. "He's signing risky deals under structures that trace back to you. If anything collapses, you're the name courts will see." I took a breath, slow, controlled. "How much time do we have?" Margaret studied me. "Enough if you don't confront him." "I have no intention of confronting him," I said. She smiled for the first time. "Good." Over the next month, I played the role everyone expected. The gracious retired founder, the supportive mother. I attended Thanksgiving dinner at Daniel's house, sat at the end of the table while his wife discussed expansion plans using phrases I had coined years earlier. "You seem well," Daniel said later, walking me to my car. "I'm learning to let go," I replied. He believed me that was his mistake. Privately, I met with people Daniel had discarded. A former project manager fired for questioning invoices. An accountant who resigned after being asked to adjust timelines. And finally, Claire. She was 30, nervous, and smarter than Daniel ever realized. "They moved money through shell vendors," she whispered across a cafe table. "And they used legacy accounts tied to your authorization. I kept copies because I was afraid." I placed my hand over hers. "You did the right thing." That night, I reread my will. Hartwell Interiors was never intended to pass directly to Daniel. It was meant to be protected, overseen, safeguarded from exactly this kind of greed. Daniel thought I was old, outdated, too sentimental to fight back. What he didn't understand was this. I wasn't preparing for revenge fueled by rage. I was preparing for justice fueled by patience. And the first lock was already starting to crack. The first real fracture appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning, disguised as a routine phone call. I was in my kitchen slicing an apple I would not finish when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost, Mrs. Hart, a man said carefully when I answered. My name is Thomas Reeves. I'm calling from an audit firm in Palo Alto. I believe you are listed as the primary authorizing officer for Hartwell Interiors. I felt my spine straighten. I was, I said. Why are you calling me? There was a pause. Paper shifting, a breath taken too late. We've been asked to review a series of transactions connected to a vendor complaint. It appears there are discrepancies involving consulting fees, accelerated payments, and reserve fund reallocations. Vendor complaint. That meant someone outside the family had noticed. Are you suggesting misconduct? I asked. I'm suggesting irregularities, he corrected. And because your signature appears on legacy authorization frameworks, your clarification would be helpful. Helpful. That was the word they always used before things became dangerous. Send me everything I said, in writing. After the call ended, I did not sit down. I walked straight to my study and opened the second drawer of my desk. Inside was a ledger Daniel did not know existed. It was not digital. It was not synced. It was old-fashioned and precise. Every major decision I had ever approved was there. Dates, purposes, conditions. What was not there mattered more. By early afternoon, the email arrived. Pages of transaction summaries, vendor names I did not recognize, consulting firms that existed only on paper, fees approved during a period when I was supposedly still in control, yet never crossed my desk. Daniel had not just pushed me out. He had used me as camouflage. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall until the anger rose fully into my chest. It was hot, brief, and sharp. Then it settled into something colder. That evening I called Margaret. They're circling, I told her. I assumed they would, she replied. The question is whether your son realizes it yet. He doesn't, I said. But he will, good Margaret said. Because once he does, he'll panic. Panic makes people careless. I had seen it dozens of times in business. Ambitious men always believed they were smarter than consequences. That night, I attended a charity fundraiser I had helped establish years earlier. I wore a simple black dress. Nothing memorable. I listened more than I spoke. Daniel was there. So was his wife. They barely noticed me. Until I spoke to a man named Richard Hale. Richard was a retired judge. He had presided over complex financial litigation for decades. He also hated being manipulated. You look tired, Eleanor, he said gently. I've had an interesting few weeks, I replied. We spoke quietly, carefully. I never accused. I never named Daniel. I simply asked questions about liability, legacy, authorization, and family-run corporations. Richard's expression shifted as the pieces aligned. If what you're implying is true, he said slowly, then someone is placing you directly in the path of serious exposure. I thought so, I said. He studied me. Are you afraid? I met his eyes. No, I'm prepared. When I returned home that night, I opened my calendar and marked a date 3 weeks away. It was the same week Hartwell Interiors planned to finalize its largest expansion deal in company history. Daniel believed momentum protected him. It never does. Daniel called me for the first time since my so-called retirement the following Sunday. His voice was too pleasant. That alone told me something was wrong. Mom, he said, I wanted to check in. You've been quiet. I've been busy, I replied. With what, he asked lightly. I smiled, though he could not see it. With adjusting. He hesitated. There's no trouble, is there? Trouble. He meant had I noticed, had I questioned, had I interfered. No, I said. Why would there be? He laughed. Too fast. No reason. I just thought I'd invite you to lunch. Just us. Lunch with Daniel used to mean family. Now it meant strategy. We met at a restaurant he chose. Expensive, loud, public. He wanted witnesses. He looked older, thinner. His confidence had edges now. We're doing incredible things, he said after the menus were cleared. The company is growing faster than ever. I've seen the headlines, I said. Congratulations. He leaned forward. I want you to feel included. You're still a part of this. Included. The word tasted bitter. I appreciate that, I said. Though I wonder why you never mentioned the new consulting partners. His fork froze. What consulting partners, he asked. I tilted my head. The ones drawing from reserve funds. There it was. Fear. Quick. Controlled. But real. That's operational, he said. You asked to step back. I stepped back from decision-making, I replied, not responsibility. Silence stretched between us. You trust me, don't you? He asked finally. I looked at my son, the boy who once cried when I left for business trips, the man who now sat across from me calculating risk. I trust facts, I said. His jaw tightened. That afternoon I met with Claire again. This time she was not nervous. They're rushing, she said. Documents are being pushed through without review. Daniel is overriding objections. Good, I said softly. She looked at me. What happens next? I closed my folder. Next, the truth becomes inconvenient. 2 days later, the audit firm escalated their inquiry. Requests became demands. Daniel's name began appearing in emails marked urgent. He did not call me again. Instead, Margaret did. They've triggered a preliminary investigation, she said. Nothing public yet, but it's moving. And my exposure, I asked. Contained, she replied, because of what you documented and what you never signed. I exhaled slowly. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the same room where I once helped Daniel practice his first presentation. The irony was almost poetic. He had built his ascent on the assumption that I would protect him no matter what. He was wrong, because love does not mean erasing yourself to save someone who would sacrifice you without hesitation. And Daniel was about to learn what it felt like to stand alone when the room went quiet. The board meeting scheduled for the end of the month would not be a celebration. It would be a reckoning. The board meeting Daniel had been preparing for all quarter arrived wrapped in false confidence and polished smiles. I wasn't supposed to be there. That was the unspoken understanding. The retired founder stayed retired. The former matriarch stayed out of sight. My absence was meant to signal surrender. Instead, I arrived early. I chose a seat near the back of the conference room, not the head of the table. I wore a neutral suit, my hair pulled back simply. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational. I did not want attention. I wanted observation. Daniel entered 10 minutes later, laughing with 2 board members, his hand resting possessively on a leather portfolio that used to be mine. When he saw me, his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Mom," he said, approaching me, "I didn't know you were coming." "I was invited," I replied calmly, "as a shareholder." He nodded too quickly. Of course. The meeting began the way these meetings always did. Growth charts, expansion projections, applause at the right moments. Daniel spoke with practiced authority, his voice confident, his posture open. If I didn't know better, I might have been proud. Then came the final agenda item. Mark, the company lawyer, cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with the expansion vote, we need to address a procedural matter." Daniel stiffened. "A procedural matter," he echoed. "Yes," Mark said, eyes flicking briefly toward me before returning to his notes. "We've received a formal inquiry from an external audit firm regarding several transactions tied to consulting vendors." The room shifted, chairs creaked, someone coughed. Daniel smiled tightly. "That's already being handled. Minor discrepancies. Nothing that affects today's decision." Mark hesitated. "The issue is not the discrepancies themselves. It's the authorization trail." Daniel's gaze snapped to me. "What authorization trail?" he asked. Mark continued carefully. "Several transactions were approved under legacy authority structures tied to Eleanor Hart. However, documentation suggests she was not actively approving these decisions at the time." All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly. "I can clarify," I said. Daniel's voice sharpened. "This isn't necessary." "It is," I replied. I explained simply. "No accusations, no dramatics. I spoke about my documented approvals, about the dates I was medically out of the office, about signatures that were never mine." When I finished, the room was silent. Finally, one board member spoke. "Daniel, why would these approvals be routed this way?" Daniel swallowed. "Operational efficiency." "Operational efficiency," another echoed skeptical. The vote on expansion was postponed. I left the building without looking back. That night, Daniel called me. "This was calculated," he said, anger barely contained. "No," I replied. "It was inevitable." "You embarrassed me." "You exposed yourself," I corrected. He hung up. For the first time, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, alignment. The truth had entered the room. Quietly, permanently. The investigation moved faster than Daniel expected. Once auditors begin asking questions, they rarely stop at the first answer. Emails were flagged, accounts frozen pending review, vendors contacted. Daniel tried to regain control the only way he knew how, by rewriting the narrative. He told the board I was confused, that grief had affected my memory, that I was struggling to accept change. It might have worked if I had been silent. Instead, I invited the board to my home. Not all of them came, only 3. That was enough. I served tea. I showed them documents, original contracts, handwritten notes, correspondence dated decades back. This is how Hartwell Interiors was structured, I said, with checks, with safeguards, to prevent exactly what is happening now. One board member leaned back unsettled. Why didn't we know about this? Because you trusted Daniel, I replied, and because you assumed I would always absorb the risk. After they left, I sat alone staring at the empty cups on the table. Daniel arrived unannounced that evening. He looked nothing like the man who had smiled under showroom lights weeks earlier. His tie was loose. His eyes were red. You're destroying everything, he said. I'm saving what I built, I replied. He paced. You could have come to me. I did, I said quietly. Years ago, when I taught you integrity. He stopped. This is about control, he said bitterly. No, I said, this is about accountability. He laughed sharp and humorless. You always needed to be needed. I stood, and you always needed to win. Silence fell between us. For the first time, I saw fear in my son's eyes, not of me, of consequence. You can still fix this, he said. Help me. I shook my head. I won't lie for you. He left without another word. That night I revised my will. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Because some lessons come too late to prevent damage, but just in time to prevent repetition. And Daniel had just crossed the point where love could no longer shield him from the cost of his choices. The press caught the scent of blood before the board did. It always happens that way. Reporters don't need proof. They need patterns, a delayed expansion, a postponed vote, a founder resurfacing after a quiet exit. By the time Hartwell Interiors issued its first carefully worded statement about routine financial reviews, the narrative had already begun to shift. I watched it unfold from my living room morning news murmuring in the background while I folded laundry that didn't need folding. A strange calm settled over me. For years I had lived inside urgency, deadlines, decisions, damage control. Now for the first time I was not responsible for holding everything together. Daniel called less. When he did, his voice carried a brittle edge. They're circling, he said one night. People I've never even met. That's what visibility feels like, I replied. He scoffed. You always wanted attention. I closed my eyes. No, Daniel, I wanted stewardship. The board convened again the following week. This time the meeting was shorter. No projections, no applause, just questions. Daniel arrived late. I sat across from him watching as he adjusted his chair, straightened his jacket, and tried to project the same authority he once wore so easily. It no longer fit. The external auditors presented their findings. Preliminary, inconclusive, but troubling. Funds rerouted, oversight bypassed, authority misrepresented. When asked to respond, Daniel launched into an explanation that sounded rehearsed but hollow. Market pressures, rapid growth, necessary shortcuts. Shortcuts. One board member leaned forward. Why were these decisions not disclosed? Daniel glanced at me because my mother was undermining confidence. I met his gaze calmly. I was restoring it. The chair of the board cleared his throat. Effective immediately, we are placing a temporary suspension on all executive authority pending full review. Daniel froze. Pending review, he repeated. Yes, the chair said, including yours. The room went very quiet. Daniel stood abruptly. This is absurd. No one stopped him when he left. Afterward, the board approached me cautiously, as if unsure whether I was ally or adversary. We need your guidance, one of them said. I shook my head. You need independence. That night I walked through my house slowly touching familiar surfaces. The staircase rail my husband once refinished. The framed photo of Daniel at age 8 missing his front tooth, grinning like the world was kind. I felt grief then, real grief, not for the company, for the son I thought I knew. The next morning I received a message from someone unexpected. Daniel's wife. We met in a quiet park. She looked exhausted, older than her years. He didn't tell me, she said, about the accounts, the pressure, the lies. I nodded. He didn't tell me either. She hesitated. Is there any way to fix this? I considered her question carefully. There are consequences. He can still survive, I said. If he stops running. She looked away. Later that afternoon, Margaret called. The investigation has widened, she said. And Eleanor, you're officially clear. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Daniel was not. That night I slept deeply for the first time in months. And in that sleep, I dreamed not of victory, but of letting go. Daniel didn't show up to the emergency board session 2 days later. His attorney did. The explanation was brief. Medical leave, extreme stress, temporary withdrawal. I knew what it really meant. He was hiding. The board accepted the explanation for now. They appointed an interim executive, an outsider, someone with no loyalty to me and none to Daniel. It was the right choice. I watched Hartwell Interiors from a distance as systems corrected themselves. Contracts paused. Vendors reviewed. Quiet accountability replaced reckless ambition. And Daniel disappeared. For nearly 3 weeks I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no angry messages in the middle of the night. The silence was unsettling, not because I feared him, but because I feared what desperation might drive him to do. Then one afternoon there was a knock at my door. I knew it was him before I opened it. He looked thinner, unshaven. His confidence had evaporated, leaving behind something raw and unfamiliar. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where he once did homework while I reviewed budgets. "They're coming after me," he said flatly. "Yes," I replied. "You could stop this." I studied him. "How?" "You could testify, say you approved things, that you knew." The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgivable. "No," I said. His hands trembled. "I'm your son." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I won't lie." He slammed his fist on the table. "You're choosing the company over me." I leaned forward. "I'm choosing truth over destruction." Tears welled in his eyes, surprising us both. "I was trying to prove myself." "You were trying to replace me," I said gently. "There's a difference." He stood pacing. "If this goes public, I'm finished." I watched him carefully. "You're not finished. You're accountable." He stopped. "What do you want from me?" The question cracked something open. "I want you to stop," I said. "Stop blaming, stop hiding, stop asking me to carry what you broke." He laughed bitterly. "And then what?" "Then you face what comes," I said, "and you live with it." He left without another word. That evening, news broke. Hartwell Interiors formally announced executive misconduct under investigation. Daniel's name was not mentioned. It didn't need to be. The story spread quietly at first, then louder. Friends stopped calling him. Investors withdrew. Invitations vanished. I received messages of support, sympathy, praise for my restraint. None of it mattered. What mattered was this. I had spent decades building something meant to outlast me, not as a monument to control, but as a legacy of care. Daniel had mistaken inheritance for entitlement, and now, as the consequences gathered momentum, I understood something essential. Revenge is not loud. It is not cruel. It is the steady refusal to be sacrificed for someone else's ambition. And the storm Daniel feared had only just begun. Public fallout has a strange rhythm. It doesn't explode all at once. It leaks. A headline here, a revised biography there, invitations quietly withdrawn, advisory roles suddenly restructured. Daniel's name didn't disappear overnight, but it began to feel radioactive. People stepped back without explanation the way they do when proximity becomes risk. I watched it happen without satisfaction. That surprised me. I had imagined that when consequences finally arrived, I would feel vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I felt something closer to mourning. Not for Daniel's career, but for the version of him I had believed in for so long. Hartwell Interiors stabilized under interim leadership. Slowly, carefully. The company breathed again. Employees who had walked on eggshells started speaking openly. Projects that had been rushed were re-examined. One afternoon, a junior designer stopped me in the hallway when I came to collect personal files. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not letting us take the fall." That was when I understood what this had really been about. Not revenge, responsibility. A week later, I received a subpoena. Not as a target, as a witness. Margaret reviewed it with me, her expression steady. "They want testimony regarding authorization structures and intent." "Of course they do," I said. "Are you ready for that?" I thought of Daniel at 8 years old, standing in front of a science fair display. He had barely finished, insisting he'd done everything himself. I remembered correcting him gently, teaching him that asking for help was not failure. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The deposition was clinical. Fluorescent lights, recorded statements, lawyers who spoke softly and listened hard. "Did you approve these transactions?" "No." "Were you aware of these consulting arrangements?" "No." "Did your son ever inform you of these decisions?" "No." The truth spoken plainly has weight. It settles. It leaves marks. When it was over, I stepped outside and sat in my car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't relieved. I was finished protecting a lie that was never mine. That evening, Daniel's wife called me. Her voice broke halfway through the first sentence. "He's blaming you," she said, "to anyone who will listen." "I know," I replied. "Did you ever think he'd go this far?" I closed my eyes. "No, but I should have." She hesitated. "They're talking about criminal charges." "Yes. And if that happens?" I waited. "He could lose everything." I spoke carefully. "He already has. He just hasn't accepted it yet." After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet around me. I realized then that this was the loneliest part of justice, the moment when you've done everything right and there is nothing left to do but watch. I did not reach out to Daniel. I would not interfere, because shielding him now would not save him. It would only teach him that consequences are negotiable, and I had spent my life teaching him the opposite. Daniel was charged in early spring. White-collar fraud, misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty. The words appeared in print before they reached my ears. A former colleague sent me the article with a single line beneath it. "I'm so sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone down. I was not surprised, but I was changed. The arraignment was quiet. No cameras, no grand statements. Daniel stood beside his attorney, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. He did not look at me when I took my seat in the back of the courtroom. I did not look away. When the judge read the charges, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, not anger. Grief. This was the final consequence of choices made long before that day. Choices I had warned him about. Boundaries I had tried to draw. Warnings he had mistaken for control. Afterward, Daniel approached me in the hallway. His voice was low, stripped of bravado. "Are you happy now?" I studied his face. The man he had become. The boy he had been. "No," I said. "I'm honest." He flinched as if struck. "You could still help," he said. "People listen to you." I shook my head. "They listen to the truth." Silence stretched between us, thick and final. "You taught me to fight," he said bitterly. "Yes," I replied, "not to cheat." He turned away. That night, I went home and opened the box where I kept letters my husband had written me during his last year. I read one slowly tracing his handwriting with my finger. "You can't save someone by destroying yourself, Eleanor. Love doesn't mean erasing the line between right and wrong." I folded the letter carefully. The next morning, I submitted my final recommendation to the board. A permanent leadership structure, independent oversight, safeguards stronger than trust alone. Hartwell Interiors would survive. Daniel would face what came next without my interference. I stood at the window as the sun rose, casting light across a city that felt both familiar and new. I had not won something. I had preserved something, and in doing so, I had finally accepted a truth I should have learned long ago. Being a mother does not require martyrdom, and justice when it comes slowly and cleanly does not leave you empty. It leaves you free. The sentence came down on a Thursday. No cameras, no dramatic speeches, just a judge with tired eyes reading consequences that had been set in motion long before anyone entered that courtroom. Daniel received probation, financial restitution, and a permanent professional ban from holding executive authority in any public or private corporation tied to fiduciary management. No prison, no spectacle, just a future quietly and irrevocably altered. When people heard some said he got off easy, they were wrong. A man like Daniel did not fear punishment. He feared irrelevance. I was not present when the decision was announced. I had chosen not to attend. My role was finished. There was nothing more my presence could clarify. Instead, I was at home sorting through decades of documents, choosing what to keep and what to release. Letting go is not a single act. It is a series of small, deliberate decisions. That afternoon, Daniel's wife came to see me. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally, as though the weight of holding everything together had finally crushed her. "He's moving out," she said quietly. I nodded. I had expected that. "He keeps saying this is your fault," she continued, "that if you'd just protected him, none of this would have happened." I met her gaze. "And do you believe that?" She shook her head, tears welling. "No, I believe this was inevitable." She stayed only a few minutes longer. We spoke about practical things, finances, the children, stability. Before she left, she paused at the door. "I hope one day," she said carefully, "you can forgive him." I considered that for a long moment. "I already have," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequence." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet house, listening to the familiar creaks of old wood settling. I thought of all the times I had rushed to clean up Daniel's messes when he was young. Missed deadlines, broken promises, half-told truths. I had called it love. Now I understood it had also been fear. Fear of being needed less. Fear of losing my place in his life. That fear was gone. In its place was something steadier. Respect for myself. That evening, I received an email from the interim executive director of Hartwell Interiors. The company had officially entered its most profitable quarter in 5 years. Not because of aggressive expansion, but because of stability. I closed the message and allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Karma does not rush. It corrects. Spring arrived gently that year. I spent more time in my garden, less time inside my head. The roses my husband once planted bloomed again, stubborn and unapologetic. I learned to sit with silence without needing to fill it. Daniel did not call. I heard about him through others. A consulting role denied. a partnership withdrawn, a reputation that followed him like a shadow he could not outrun. Once months later, I saw him at the grocery store. We stood in the same aisle, both reaching for the same box of tea. He froze when he recognized me. "Mom," he said. "Daniel." That was all. He stepped back. I took the tea. We nodded once, awkward and final, and walked away in opposite directions. I did not feel regret. I felt release. Hartwell Interiors continued without me. That was always the goal. Legacy is not about control. It is about continuity without collapse. I revised my will one last time. Clear, balanced, fair, not punitive, just honest. Some people confuse revenge with cruelty. This was never cruelty. It was the refusal to be erased. It was the refusal to carry guilt that was never mine. It was the understanding that love does not mean shielding someone from the natural result of their choices. If you are listening to this and you are a woman who has been sidelined, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside by the very people you sacrificed for, understand this. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. And justice does not require you to raise your voice. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply standing still while the truth does the walking. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived a version of it yourself, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters, and you are not alone.